This weekend, the latest animated Transformers movie, Transformers 1, drops in theaters, so it's time to do a Transformers movie tier ranking. If you want to create your own tier ranking, I've got the template link down below in the description. If you do take a screenshot of it, share it on your Instagram stories or Twitter feed and tag me, I will share some of your tier rankings on there, and let's get started. Kicking things off with the live action films, Transformers, the first one directed by Michael Bay, and it basically uses the structure of these epic disaster movies for this Transformers film, and it's surprisingly effective, where for the first hour of the movie, it's establishing our characters, it's building intrigue, and slowly building out the lore of the Transformers without fully introducing them to us, and all of it actually works really well. So by the time the Transformers are introduced and we meet Optimus Prime, it feels like this big epic moment for the characters as well as for the audience.
My name is Optimus Prime.
So for this one, I'm gonna kick things right off. This one goes up in the great category. For the first movie, this was the right way to go. As much as Shia LaBeouf has kind of had some weird antics over the last 10 years, he's very good at having this naturalistic charm to him. He's hyperactive and obnoxious in a sense, but in a charming way that's endearing, that feels like some weird guy that you know, that kind of bugs you, but you'll also like to be around him at the same time.
50 years from now, when you're looking back at your life, don't you want to be able to say you had the guts to get in the car?
And then Michael Bay knows how to deliver big action spectacle. And despite this movie being nearly 20 years old, it looks fantastic. They knew how to balance the practical with the digital. They shot on locations and the explosions are real. And so you get a world that you're intrigued by. It builds out that mythology. The humor works well enough. I mean, it's Michael Bay juvenile stuff, but at least the first time around it kind of worked. And then you get big slam bang finale. So if you're going to do a Michael Bay Transformers movie like this, this is the way to do it. And it definitely worked really well the first time around and became this iconic film that everybody watched a zillion times and spawned a bunch of sequels, most of which came nowhere close to the same quality as this one. Transformers Revenge of the Fallen. Now, coming off the massive success of the first film, the producers wanted a quick turnaround, strike while the iron is hot, so they announced a release date that was just 2 years after the release of the first film. Now, there are many examples of times where big franchises have had a 2-year turnaround and it turned out great. Spider-Man 2 came out just 2 years after Spider-Man 1, and many people believe that is the superior film. But it is a quick turnaround that doesn't really give you any room if it's not a smooth pre-production process. In the case of this movie, there was a writer's strike that happened while they were writing the movie. So this movie definitely falls into the not good category. Essentially what happened was they hired a writer who had 2 weeks to write an outline before the writer's strike happened. So they get an outline, 2 weeks of work, and Michael Bay goes off and preps all of these action set pieces from the outline, but there's no script, there's no connective tissue. It's just like go here, go here, go here. They prep all of the big sequences. Then months later, the strike ends. They're able to bring the writer back on, and the writer has to write around the action set pieces that the VFX people were prepping, developing, and the scouts were scouting out locations. They had to write around all of that.
It's a bold strategy, Cotton. Let's see if it pays off for them.
So when you watch the movie and all of a sudden the plot goes from 0 to 11 very suddenly 45 minutes into it, why did that happen? When you're watching the movie and it introduces teleportation out of nowhere, when they introduce all of these new Transformers technologies where they like turn into people, that's never used ever again or ever explained. Why does that happen? Why in the third act of the movie is Sam in a car and then he gets out of the car and runs across a field that's exploding? Why does all of this happen? because the movie was prepped without a script. They never wrote a proper script. So they had to like duct tape together all of these ideas that they had, and it never really fully comes together. Beyond that, the humor is even more juvenile. There's like 2 different dog humping jokes in the first 5 minutes of the movie.
Name's Willie. Yeah. Say my name. Say my name.
There's a robot scrotum joke in the movie.
I am directly below enemy scrotum.
So, not good. I will say this, though. There is a certain charm to the original cast of characters with Sam, Megan Fox, his parents. That vibe that it had early on, I still appreciate that vibe. The script here doesn't really work, but I like this lineup more so than the Wahlberg era. Transformers: Dark of the Moon. And this time Megan Fox is out, Sam is a little bit older with a job, and the movie is bigger and more explosive than ever. I'm putting this one in the good category. If it just comes down to the spectacle, I think that this was the peak of Michael Bay's action, excitement, all of that fun stuff. Starts off with a nice setup, kind of, building into the moon landing. And so stuff where there's already kind of conspiracy theories. Let's tie Transformers lore into that, have a little bit of fun with it, and build out this history beyond the start of the first movie of the Transformers' involvement with mankind. And maybe it drags a little bit too long getting everything started. But once you move into the back half of this film and you're doing the battle for Chicago, this is just some glorious Bayhem action. This movie came out over 10 years ago, and it looks so much better than the vast majority of the $200 million plus blockbusters that we've been getting recently, where there's just a certain veracity to it. There's a believability to it. And the combination of filming actual real things and amplifying it with visual effects looks real. It looks like an actual place where a thing is taking place, even though it's a big, gigantic robot. And they're destroying buildings that are collapsing. We're fighting in the streets. All of it is believable. It's epic. It's massive. That is what Michael Bay does so well.
Everything, down to the last minute details.
And I think this is the movie that delivers the best version of that. Today's video is brought to you by Factor. We are deep into the summer. I'm in the middle of Texas where it is hot. As soon as I finish shooting this video, I have to go mow my lawn. I'm not looking forward to it. But you can fuel up for those warm days with Factor's no prep, no mess meals. Meet your wellness goals this summer thanks to the menu of chef-crafted meals with options like Calorie Smart, Protein Plus, and Keto. I always go Keto or Protein Plus because I'm a high-protein, low-carbs kind of guy. Factor's fresh, never frozen meals are dietitian approved and ready to eat in just 2 minutes. So no matter how busy you are, you'll always have time to enjoy nutritious, great tasting meals. No shopping, prepping, cooking, or cleanup. With school back in session, life falling more into a routine, it's a great time to use Factor to help meet your health goals. With 35 different meals and more than 60 add-ons to choose from every week, you'll always have new flavors to explore. Make your day delicious from breakfast to dessert. Stay fueled with easy, nutritious options. I like to kickstart my days with their protein shakes. Head to factormeals.com/SeanChandler50 and use code SeanChandler50 to get 50% off your first box plus 20% off your next month. That's code SeanChandler50 at factormeals.com/SeanChandler50 to get 50% off your first box plus 20% off your next month while your subscription is active. Transformers: Age of Extinction. Now, full disclosure, I am a bit biased towards this movie because all of the Texas segments were shot in Taylor, which is just down the road from where I live. Whenever I do some cross Texas driving, I drive by shooting locations for this film. With all that said, this one goes in the bottom tier. What on earth are we doing here? The movie starts off with actually not too bad of a setup, where the United States government no longer trusts the Transformers and they are hunting them down. That's a good setup for a Transformers movie. But then it keeps setting up more and more plot lines where we have this whole backstory about Mark Wahlberg's character. There's an evil corporation trying to harvest Transformers parts for their own purposes. And then we have the Dinobots show up towards the end of the movie. The dinosaurs were killed by the Transformers. And then we're traveling from Texas across the United States, across the globe. There's so much plot. There's so many things happening, but there's not a clear story. Plot points happen, but there's no one single journey that we're on, just a series of new plots introduced in order to set up a new bloated, overlong set piece that just goes on forever, where it's not always clear what we're trying to accomplish, and it just feels, you get so lost in everything taking place. And it's a movie that feels like it spent more time trying to justify why the daughter's boyfriend isn't breaking the law by dating her than it does trying to explain the plot of the movie.
This is illegal. She's a minor.
Protected by the Romeo and Juliet laws. Statute 2705-3.
Texas statute? No, don't like that.
As much fun as it is to see some familiar locations when I watch the film, this film to me is just exhausting, where it's too much. There's too much mayhem. There's too much action. There's too many explosions. And it just feels like cinematic noise.
What? No!
Next up, Transformers: The Last Night. And just like Age of Extinction, this is a movie packed with plot lines without any one clear story. And in the case of this movie, we even kind of know why. After Age of Extinction, they did this whole writers retreat where they brought a bunch of writers in to brainstorm a zillion different plot lines for Transformers movies. And it was reported they came up with 14 different ideas for Transformers movies. And it seems like instead of, like picking the best ones and making individual movies out of them, they just decided to cram all of that into this one film. So it starts off with King Arthur. Like, we're watching a Transformers movie and we're like seeing Merlin as a drunk and King Arthur. Then it ties into the Nazis in World War II. Then the Earth is being invaded. You have Cade saving this little girl and it's like the end times and it's post-apocalyptic. Suddenly, Cade is the chosen one.
It would appear, Mr. Cade, that last night is you.
And it's this globe-trotting adventure. Optimus Prime meets his maker. Earth is Unicron, Cybertron's everything. It's like, what is this?
This is a mess. None of these storylines make any sense.
There's so much going on in this movie. Now, I think this one is a little bit more fun because it's so ludicrous and it swings so much for the fences that just on pure insanity, I think it's better than Age of Extinction, but also it also just has to go into that, what on earth are we doing here? Because seriously, King Arthur followed by the Nazis in a Transformers movie? What are we doing? And then, Anthony Hopkins is in it delivering these epic speeches with like the corniest of jokes about the score.
My lord, you ruined the moment again. I was making the moment more epic.
I mean, it is bizarre. It's wacky as can be. So it has a little bit of that so bad it's good, but that also is to fully admit that it is bad.
Stop it!
And kind of to that point, the movie has like way tonal whiplash because we're going from cornball Michael Bay humor to the Nazis in epic speeches.
I want to stay and I want to fight them.
It's all over the place. And the only thing that it has more of than plot lines and tones is aspect ratios. This is one of the worst offenders of a movie where the person, like you couldn't pick an aspect ratio, so it keeps changing while you're watching the film, which is distracting when it's happening mid-sequence. Next up, Bumblebee. This time around, Michael Bay is out, Phil Knight is in, and if you don't know, Phil Knight is actually the son of the founder creator of Nike, and the guy that runs Leica Studios and thus has done a bunch of these character-based Leica films and then did Bumblebee. And for that reason, I think you see it's a very different type of Transformers movie, and I think it is a great Transformers movie. Instead of prioritizing all of the action set pieces and just going bigger and more bombastic, it went, let's dive in and tell a story about characters. So essentially, it's a boy and his dog story, or girl and her dog story. It's E.T., it's Iron Giant, set in the world of Transformers. So you build out this character, played by Haley Steinfeld, that you care about her. She's charming, she's engaging, she's interesting, and she comes across Bumblebee. And of course, Bumblebee is fun and charming, a fan favorite of the Transformers, and that bond is formed. And since you care about them, you care about what happens to them. The action isn't as spectacular, it isn't as grandiose, but when you actually care about the characters, you care about what's happening, even if it isn't as extravagant. So for me, this is the movie that I get the most invested in because it works on the most human of levels, the characters. And it did something different. Instead of doing another global epic, it told a smaller story, made it more personal, and that's absolutely why it works for me. Then we have last year's Transformers: Rise of the Beasts. For me, this was the safest of the Transformers movies, where it doesn't swing for the fences, but it also doesn't go as small scale as Bumblebee. It goes right in the middle. It focuses a little bit more on the human characters, but not so much as Bumblebee did. It has big, grandiose action set pieces, but not nearly as extravagant as the Michael Bay action set pieces. So it's right there in the middle, and that's kind of my feeling about the film. It is good. It's a good, safe Transformers movie. It has some lore, but it doesn't get lost in the lore. Actually, of the Transformers movies, it's one of the ones that does a better job of very early on establishing what the plot is about. There's this thing we're trying to get. Here's the different reasons that different people want it. Now let's spend 2 hours trying to see who gets there and how it plays out. It makes sense on a story level in a way that most of the Michael Bay films don't work, although because they're too convoluted. But it's just kind of, it's not as memorable because it doesn't make the mistakes of the Michael Bay films. It doesn't have nearly as bad of juvenile humor as those films, but it also doesn't have the heights of those films with the spectacle, the awesome action. Even the final battle in this movie, there's all this stuff happening, but it's like in the middle of nowhere. And so it doesn't have that veracity that the Michael Bay films have, filming them in Chicago at great, just famous wonders of the world. This one just feels like it's like in the middle of nowhere. And so it's not quite as exciting, but that's the idea of safe. It doesn't take the big risks that get you the big rewards. It doesn't take the big risks that get you in trouble. So it's right there in the middle as a passable, safe Transformers movie. And that'll bring us to the animated Transformers movies with Transformers the movie. Now, I'm an 80s kid. I was born in 1981. I had the original Transformers toys when I was a kid. I watched the original Transformers show when I was a kid. And this is a movie that I did watch way back in the day, but it was never one that, I was one of my definitive movies of my childhood or anything like that. I always preferred G.I. Joe the movie and my G.I. Joes to my Transformers, but I always did like Transformers. All of that said, this is just a movie, watching it as an adult, I just don't get into it. I gotta say, not for me. Fully understand that many Transformers fans adore this film. They love it. I've watched it, I believe, 3 times in the history of this YouTube channel of the last 8 years. I've watched it, I believe, 3 times. And every single time, it just feels too much like a movie version of a 40-year-old cartoon, which is very close to exactly what it is. It is a follow-up to several seasons of that show, and it just kind of drops you into the middle of it as if you've seen those. I watched them back in the 80s and the early 90s, but I have not watched them since. And thus, watching this movie, it doesn't do a whole lot to catch you up on who the characters are. So at the end of our first act, we're killing off major characters without having established who they are.
Not a great plan.
So as a movie in and of itself, it doesn't work all that well. Some sequels can get away with that. I would say one that's a sequel to Seasons of Television, it doesn't work all that great. And just in general, the number of characters, the way the lore is handled, the inclusion of a Weird Al song, the pieces just don't, it doesn't work for me as a man currently in my 40s that did watch it back in the day, but never was like enamored with it or anything like that. I actually did structure this tier ranking to talk about this one later on, because if the first thing I said in this video was to put this one real low on my ranking, I know that would run a bunch of people off, because this movie has a lot of fans. I am simply not one of them. And finally, Transformers 1. And for many of us, this is the Transformers movie that we've been waiting for a very long time. For that reason, it is going in the great category, where this movie, it is 100% about Transformers. No human characters. Like, all the live action movies are primarily about the human characters, and then the humans meet the Transformers. This one, it's all Transformers. Our actual stars are our actual stars, and it's set 100% on Cybertron. For a long time, many of us have been saying, man, when are we getting a movie on Cybertron? When are we going to get a movie on Cybertron? We finally get it. And I was hesitant about this movie when it first came out, or the first trailer dropped, I mean, because it sold it just as a buddy comedy. And the movie itself does a much better job of starting there when young Optimus, young Megatron are these lowly workers. And from there, it builds into this epic story about freeing Cybertron with conspiracies and all sorts of stuff with the lore, the mythology. It builds it all out. There's action, there's races, there's humor, and you buy into the division between Optimus and Megatron, where their personalities, their different value sets, cause them to have very different reactions to the revelations of the story that drive them in different directions. So for me, this movie absolutely worked. And I think it is one of the best Transformers movies that we have gotten, and a great companion to all of the Transformers movies that we've gotten that does something fresh and new while still being entertaining and accessible. So it goes up in the great category. And I did intentionally put nothing in the S tier. None of these to me are like S tier all-time fantastic movies. There's three of them that are like, that's great at what it's going for. But none of them are all timers for me personally. So that's why that category is left empty but still included on there. You can share yours using that link down below in the description. If you screen capture it, share it on your Instagram stories, over on Twitter, tag me. I will share some of your tier rankings. Thank you so much for watching. Keep talking movies and TV too much. Bye-bye.